and welcome back to Empowered Esquire TV. And today we will be discussing 3 things that your attorney should tell you, but probably won't. Let's jump right into it. First, trial should be a last resort because litigation is unpredictable. One more time. Trial should be a last resort because litigation is unpredictable. You never know what could happen at a trial. You never know what could happen if you ultimately have to litigate your case. You're leaving your case in the hands of a judge who may be having a bad day, may be having a stomach ache, may have seen your attorney in another case and not liked him or her from that case. Or you may be dealing with a jury of people who may be unfamiliar with your legal issues, and even with the instruction given, still may not fully understand what's going on. So with all those things considered, trial should be a last resort. Your first measure should be to attempt to settle whatever it is your issue is. You should be trying to reach some sort of amicable settlement with the other party as opposed to heading straight towards litigation. But of course, many attorneys make more money from litigation than they do from settlement. And this is why you're not going to very often find an attorney that will tell you that trial should be a last resort. Second, you can and you should shop around. Just as when you go to the doctor and you receive an opinion and then decide, I think I want a second opinion. You can and you should do the same thing with lawyers/attorneys. If you go to an attorney and receive a consultation and for some reason you're just not feeling satisfied with that decision or with that plan of action, you should seek consultations from other attorneys. Each attorney is going to approach your case in a different way and therefore have a different type of strategy. And you may find when you shop around that you find someone who suits you better. And third, the coup de gras, as I like to say, you can fire your attorney at any time. At any time. Now, there's this belief that once you get to a certain point in your case, it's too late for you to fire your attorney. You just have to stay the course and stick with this attorney that you have already hired. And that is not true. You can choose to fire your attorney at almost any time. And that attorney will have an ethical obligation to transfer all of the files that they have and all the documents that they have in relation to your case over to your new attorney and to ensure that the file in its entirety reaches your new attorney within a reasonable amount of time. So there you have it. 3 things that your lawyer/attorney should tell you, but probably won't. I'll see you next time here on Empowered Esquire TV.
She joins us now with more. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, Elsa.
So remind us, who is Tom Barrack and what kind of trouble is he in exactly?
Barrack is a real estate investor with close ties to Trump. He chaired Trump's inaugural committee, but the new charges don't have anything to do with that. Rather, prosecutors say Barrack leveraged his influence with candidate then President Trump to win favorable treatment for a foreign government. Now, those kinds of influence campaigns inside the U.S. are supposed to be disclosed to the Justice Department, but the indictment says Barrack never filed that paperwork, and when he was trying for a federal job, he left that work off the forms. When he met with the FBI, he lied about it, they say.
But if this is a case about influence, what did Barrack allegedly do here to help the United Arab Emirates?
Court papers say that Barrack really tried to cultivate influence from the very beginnings. Even during the 2016 campaign, that he inserted language favorable to the United Arab Emirates in one of Trump's speeches back then. He told the UAE to create a wish list of policy goals for the whole Trump administration. He allegedly lobbied the White House to avoid a meeting at Camp David during this blockade in Qatar by the UAE and other Middle Eastern governments. He even made a bid to be the American ambassador and said it would be good for Abu Dhabi. He also spouted talking points on TV and in an op-ed, all according treaties with the U.S. The government wants him moved to Brooklyn. Then they can argue before a judge, they say, about whether he can be released pending trial.
And what is Barrack saying about all that?
I reached his lawyer, Matt Harrington, via email. The lawyer says Barrack made himself available voluntarily to the investigators from the outset. That he's pleading not guilty today. Barrack has a lot of resources at his disposal. It'll be interesting to see where this case goes exactly. I should mention prosecutors also charged an employee of Barrack's investment firm today.
Wow. Okay, well, before we let you go, Barrack is the latest in a number of people close to former President Trump who have now been charged with federal crimes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a long list, Elsa. Remember, before they received clemency, Trump advisor Roger Stone and Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort had been convicted of federal offenses. And Trump's former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is still under active investigation. The FBI raided his offices this year and seized something like 21 different electronic devices. And Trump's one-time lawyer, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty and served prison time as part of a hush money scheme during Trump's presidency. The real question is this Barrack case the last shoe to drop, or is more coming?
To be continued. That is NPR's Carrie Johnson. Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome.
And now more from NPR.
All righty. So we just heard from a reporter on NPR.org about a man named Thomas Barrack, who is a former advisor of the former President Donald Trump, who has now been indicted. So let's go ahead and take a look at the press release from the Department of Justice regarding this indictment, shall we? Okay, here we are. We're on the Department of Justice website. This is for immediate release. July 20th, 2021. Former advisor to presidential candidate among 3 defendants charged with acting as agents of a foreign government. Defendants allegedly acted and conspired to act at the direction of senior United Arab Emirates officials to influence a presidential campaign, public opinion, and the U.S. government. So those are some pretty explosive accusations, right? The government is accusing everyone involved, so everyone that we are about to read about in this indictment, as being a part of a conspiracy in which the United Arab Emirates really had a hand in our election in the United States of America, the campaign of former President Donald Trump, the public opinion of the United States of America, and ultimately the government of the United States of America. That is a pretty explosive accusation. Okay, let's dive in. A 7-count indictment was unsealed today in a New York federal court relating to the defendant's unlawful efforts to advance the interests of the United Arab Emirates in the United States at the direction of senior UAE officials by influencing the foreign policy positions of the campaign and of a candidate in the 2016 US presidential election, and subsequently the foreign policy positions of the US government in the incoming administration, as well as seeking to influence public opinion in favor of UAE interest. So, just a quick note. When you see the mention or when you see the term that the indictment was unsealed, what that tells you is that the indictment was previously private. Previously, the government, probably for security reasons, was refusing to make the indictment public. But now the government has decided that those reasons have subsided, and now the indictment is public. A lot of times when the charges involve something to do with the security of the nation, something to do with the security of the government, or something involving minors, you will see that the indictment is originally sealed and then it is later on unsealed. Okay. Now let's see who was named in this indictment. So Thomas Joseph Barrack, I think his name is Barrick. We're going to go with Barrick. Thomas Joseph Barrick, age 74, from Santa Monica, California. Matthew Grimes, age 27, from Aspen, Colorado. And Rashid Sultan Rashid Al-Malik Al-Shahi, aka Rashid Al-Malik and Rashid Al-Malik, 43, a UAE national. Okay, so we have here 2 Americans and then a UAE national, are accused of acting and conspiring to act as agents of the UAE between April 2016 and April 2018. This indictment also charges Barrick with obstruction of justice. We've talked about that charge before, and making multiple false statements during a June 20th, 2019 interview with federal law enforcement agents. So these men are being accused of not only trying to influence somehow the United States of America in regards to the UAE, but also of making false statements when being asked about it by federal agents, of trying to obstruct justice, which probably means that they somehow tried to mislead the government when the government was investigating, allegedly, right? And ultimately, of acting as agents or acting as ambassadors for the UAE without advising the government that they are doing such. So for those of you who don't know, if you are becoming involved in the US government on behalf of another government, meaning you are somehow being an ambassador, an actor, an influencer, a lobbyist, right? You get the gist. You should notify by law the US government that you are such. You should identify yourself. Okay? All righty. So they go on to allege that Barrick capitalized on his friendships, and they insinuate, with whom, and access to a candidate. That would be former President Donald Trump. He was a candidate at that time. And the American media to advance the policy goals of a foreign government without disclosing their true allegiances. So now the government takes their allegation a step further, right? They go from just saying that he was influencing former President Donald Trump, and they go into saying that Barrick was allegedly also influencing the media. He also had friends in the media who he was using to somehow influence the public of the United States with regards to the UAE. All right. They then go on to somehow additionally, talk about more allegations regarding how this was done. And then they make a very, very staunch warning. So, Acting United States Attorney Jacqueline M. Kasulis for the Eastern District of New York. Okay, so she made this very assertive statement. She says, "These arrests serve as a warning to those who act at the direction of foreign governments without disclosing their actions, as well as those who seek to mislead investigators about their actions, that they will be brought to justice and face the consequences." So, what does that tell us? Well, when you have a US attorney making this very assertive statement about the fact that this case is a warning, they are pretty much telling the public, we do intend on viewing these actions as direct treason towards the United States government. We do intend on viewing these types of actions as something that we should prosecute and prosecute zealously. So she's pretty much letting everyone know, if you are in any way involved in anything anywhere near this, you might be on our radar and you may need to cease that behavior immediately, right? She then continues her statement about the indictment. And then the press release gives you a preface of the indictment and the documents that were filed, right? Now, here is something really juicy here, this paragraph right here. In this paragraph, they get into some of the direct actions that they're saying Barrick, Al-Shahi, and Grimes actually took, right? So the actual things they did allegedly to warrant this indictment. So here we go. Barrick, Al-Shahi, and Grimes allegedly took numerous steps in the United States to advance the interest of the UAE. For example, in May 2016, Barrick inserted language praising the UAE into a campaign speech to be delivered by the candidate about U.S. energy policy in May 2016, and emailed an advanced draft of the speech to Al-Shahi for delivery to senior UAE officials. Let's take a moment. So the government is alleging that Barrick, Al-Shahi, and Grimes were writing speeches for former President Trump while he was campaigning that had calculated and purposeful language that was praising the UAE, and then sending these speeches to the UAE for them to approve of before President Trump actually delivered them, right? Former President Trump, right? So they're pretty much accusing the UAE by way of these three people of actually being the puppeteer behind former President Trump, at least during his campaign. Now, we don't know if they're going to get into what may or may not have happened during his presidency. They then go into the presidential election. They get into some communications between the government and Barrick, which is how they're tying Barrick to Al-Shahi. And then they go on to describe the arraignment, right? So let's take a look at the actual indictment, shall we? Okay, so you are still seeing the press release, I believe. So let me go ahead and stop sharing that tab and allow you to see the actual indictment. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is the actual indictment that was filed. So you see here, named defendants. Now remember, we always talk about the case caption here. So you know this is a federal case, right? You see United States of America. The Rashid Sultan Rashid Al-Malik Al-Shahi, also known as, right, Thomas Joseph Barrick and Matthew Grimes. Now we'll go through this indictment and then we'll have a quick combo about who Thomas Barrick is, as far as what level of importance he had, what did he advise former President Trump on, and we'll also have a quick conversation about who Matthew Grimes is, okay? So now they get into kind of sort of who the defendants are within the indictment. So not necessarily their relation to former President Trump, right? But the fact that Rashid Al-Shahi is a citizen of the United Arab Emirates and that Barrick is a citizen of the United States of America living in Los Angeles. Remember, they have to discuss who the parties are. So that's something they do have to address. And the same for Matthew Grimes. They go into talking about the Arab Emirates being a foreign government, which we know that, right? We don't need to discuss that. So let's get into the actual charges. The beginning of the indictment refers to some of the factual allegations. All right, this is a 45-page indictment, by the way, so scrolling through this is, okay, let's see. There are a lot of factual portions of this, which is understandable because there's 7 counts. So they want to include all of the important factual issues. All right, let's see. What page is this? Okay, so that's where they get into his obstruction of justice. So that's towards the end. We want to come back a little earlier than that. Let's see. This indictment is a beastly document. Oh my goodness. Let's see. I mean, it's difficult to even tell where they begin discussing the charges. Okay, 3. My goodness. You know what? We'll just have to continue on page 2. Unfortunately, this indictment is far too beastly for us to try to sift through it otherwise. Okay, so the government of the United Arab Emirates, they discuss that it is a foreign government. They discuss some different officials, okay? They then go into regulations for agents of foreign governments. So as I prefaced earlier, if you are going to be an agent, an ambassador, a lobbyist, anything like that for a foreign government, you have to make yourself known. You cannot come into the United States of America with that sort of position and then with those sort of interests and not let the United States know. So they say in the indictment, an individual acting in the United States as an agent of a foreign government is required to provide prior notification to the Attorney General of the United States. Okay, so they're establishing that because you know that they are accusing Rashid, Grimes, and Barrick of not making themselves known while they were acting as agents for the UAE. They then go on to say, or to allege, the defendant's actions in the United States as agents of the United Arab Emirates. Okay, so here they go. They then say that all 3 defendants acted, aided, and abetted one another. Why is it important for them to say acted, aided, and abetted one another? Well, if you have been around, you know that whenever the government is charging a conspiracy or any type of group action, they have to connect all of the defendants to each other. So it is vital that in this indictment, they say that Rashid Al-Sahi, Thomas Barrick, and Matthew Grimes are all acting together. They have to say that. They then go on to implicate some unnamed UAE officials as well, who they are alleging had some sort of teamwork with Al-Sahi, Barrick, and Grimes. Now, they now describe exactly what they are accusing them of doing: influencing public opinion, influencing foreign policy, obtaining information about foreign policy positions and related decision-making within the campaign, and at times, the United States government. Now, this accusation in particular is very, very serious because the campaign and what happened when former President Trump was campaigning, that's one thing, right? That's one thing. But if they can prove that Barrick, Grimes, and Al-Sahi were actually doing this behind the scenes, lobbying and being agents for the UAE while former President Trump was president, you have an entirely new ballgame, because now you have them challenging the safety and the security of the actual United States government. It's not just someone who is attempting to become president, right? It's the actual president that these people are now being accused of having influence over and having unencumbered and illegal access to. Okay. They go on to allege developing a back channel line of communication with the campaign and at times officials of the United States government. Again, if they can validate that allegation, that is an extremely serious allegation. And then lastly, they say developing plans to increase the United Arab Emirates' political influence and to promote its foreign policy preferences. Okay. Now they get into a meeting that they are alleging occurred. So they have Baric al-Sahi having emails between one another. So again, whenever you see the government referring to emails and text messages and things like that, you know that these are items they have in their possession, which is, as we're always saying on this channel, corroboration. And sometimes I switch that word up and I say substantiation. But as we know here, that is something that indicates to you that the prosecution has a case that is on steady ground. It's not a fuddy-duddy, sandcastle might be washed away at a trial kind of case. Okay. So they go into some emails in which you have some UAE officials pretty much telling Baric that their country needs to have people in the United States of America who can do more than an ambassador, because ambassadors are limited. And really, what he is saying to Baric, allegedly, is our ambassadors have to do things that are legal. They have to do things that are above board. And so we need someone in the US, allegedly, who can do things that they can't do. Okay, and now we get into how Baric is related to former President Trump. So we have here that Baric allegedly told the UAE that he had a 30-year partnership with former President Trump and that he had worked on former President Trump's campaign. Okay, but we have to remember that in this indictment, they're referring to things that happened when former President Trump was campaigning and during his presidency. So you're going to often hear me switch and revert back because that is when these things actually occurred, when he was still the president. Okay, they discuss some more emails. And now they get into the speech that they allege that the UAE actually edited before former President Trump delivered it. They allege that they have emails between al-Sahi and Baric, again, in which Baric is sending al-Sahi drafts of this speech that former President Trump is going to deliver. And the UAE is responding and saying, oh, we like this draft, or we like that, or, so in other words, they're insinuating that this foreign nation was so heavily involved in the United States government that they were approving and disproving speeches that were being delivered by former President Trump while he was on the campaign trail and while he was president. Very interesting. They discussed that same speech a bit more. Then they alleged that there were even more emails. Now they dig into media appearances. They now insinuate that Baric was promoting the agenda of the UAE during his media appearances and that he was under the direction of al-Sahi. So in other words, let's say Baric appeared on CNN, allegedly, right? Baric was somehow using these appearances to drop nuggets of statements, right, that were either positive about the UAE or somehow meant to influence the U.S. Opinion of the UAE, and that allegedly al-Sahi was really the person that was behind these statements. Then they dig into it some more. They say that Baric actually went onto a televised interview on a specific date in which he did try to influence the public regarding the UAE. They delve more into Baric and his alleged communications with al-Sahi, more phone conversations and emails, more interviews. They speak about an interview in July of 2016 in which allegedly Baric again did the same thing. So in other words, more than one interview in which they're alleging that Baric purposely planted bits of information that he was told to plant by the UAE by way of al-Sahi. So they're alleging here that Baric, in this interview on July 18th, praised the UAE and that he then emailed al-Sahi and said, I nailed it. I nailed it this morning for the home team. Watch and send it. Interesting. So even if we were to take a step away from this indictment, right, and we were just to look at this email, it seems to be, on the outside looking in, strange for a U.S., let's say, U.S. government associate, right? It seems to be strange for a U.S. government associate to be emailing with a foreign national who is also in some type of role in his foreign government and saying that he did something for the home team and insinuating that they together are the home team. Interesting. They detail more emails between Al-Sahi and Barack, and now they start to bring in Grimes. So you see, they start mentioning that there were some emails in which Grimes was copied in these emails as well. And then they say that in 2016, in September of 2016, Grimes began texting with Al-Sahi and mentioning Barrick and sort of acting as an intermediary at times between Al-Sahi and Barrick. So now we know what Grimes is being accused of doing. More emails, more text messages. Again, they are alleging, the government is alleging that they have a case that is pretty solid. They have text messages, they have emails. They're not just relying on statements or testimony of others. They have evidence to support their allegations, is what they are allegedly saying. They then go in to discuss a foreign policy alleged action that occurred. So this is another interesting point. So they allege that beginning in approximately June of 2016, defendants Rashid Sultan Al-Sahi, Thomas Barrick, and Matthew Grimes, acting at the direction of the United Arab Emirates, drafted materials proposing a strategy for the UAE to promote its foreign policy and increase its potential influence in the US. So when you read that initially, it just sounds like a repetition of what they've already alleged, but it is not. But it is not. The government is now alleging that Al-Sahi, a foreign national, Barrick, a U.S. government associate, and Grimes, a U.S. national, all got together as a team, you guys, to write policy for UAE, which they felt would be effective in the US. That is the exact illustration of being an agent for a foreign country without disclosing it. Okay. They get into some more of Al-Sahi and Grimes and Barrick's communication and how they drafted this proposal. So we're going to skip forward. We know that they are doing more substantiation and corroboration, right? They're talking about more text messages. Now they get into how these messages were sent between these men. Because as you can imagine, hypothetically, if someone were to do the things that these men are being accused of, you're not just going to take your iPhone, right, and start texting each other, hey, what's going on? Let's go ahead and do this completely illegal foreign advocacy / agent thing. Yeah, that's not going to happen, right? There would have to be, if you had some level of desire not to be caught, some way in which you're encrypting these messages. So here we go. Here is the government's allegation. So the government is alleging that Al-Sahi acquired a cellular telephone on which he installed a secure messaging application, and that is the application that was used to send messages between Al-Sahi and Grimes and Barrick. That's how they set up their meetings. That is how they discuss back and forth how they would, quote unquote, allegedly influence what was going on in the US. They go in to discuss more text messages. They then discuss an op-ed that was written by Barrick. So if you're unfamiliar with an op-ed, it is an editorial piece / article, if you will, that really is opinion based. So it's not necessarily based in fact. It is more so in regards to the opinion of a person on a certain issue. So what they're saying here is that Thomas Barrick, published an opinion article in a media outlet in which he discussed United States foreign policy. They then go on to allege that before publishing this article, Grimes, because remember, allegedly Grimes came in at some point and started acting as the intermediary. Grimes solicited, so he contacted the UAE and received from the UAE input on what should be in this opinion piece. So once more, imagine you have a US national who is aligned with the government writing a piece on foreign policy, and there is a foreign government who is telling him what to write. All righty. They then go some more into text messages. They're just further corroborating, right? They discuss more text messages between UAE officials and Al-Sahi, and then these messages were ultimately then sent to the alleged intermediary, Grimes. They discuss even more text messages. I mean, wow, this is quite a slew of text messages, more text messages. Now they get into assistance to the UAE during the presidential transition. So remember earlier I said, it's one thing for you to be accused of influencing a presidential candidate, but it is another thing altogether for you to be accused of influencing a sitting president of the United States. And now here, they're getting into it. They're taking that step. They're saying that these men were allegedly continuing to influence when former President Trump became the president. Now they allege that Al-Sahi, Barrick, and Grimes repeatedly took steps to assist the UAE in connecting with the incoming administration of the United States president-elect. So they are accusing Al-Sahi, Barrick, and Grimes of being a direct line of communication between former President Trump's administration and the UAE. Okay. They then allege that there were telephone calls made back and forth. There were more text messages back and forth. It looks like this encrypted secret messaging application really didn't work at all, did it? I mean, they went through quite a bit of fuss and muss, allegedly, to have this super secret encrypted message coding, whatever. And it doesn't look like it actually worked, does it? Interesting. Okay, so we have more accusations about text messages. Man, there are a lot of text messages exchanged here. More text messages. Now you may wonder, why would the prosecution take the time to include all of these messages in their indictment? And the reason is actually much simpler than you would think. It is easier to present your case very, very well in the very beginning than to have to deal with a lot of back and forth motions being filed by the defense counsel because you published an indictment that on its face looks to be insufficient, right? So if they have a strong position, it really is in their interest to let it be known that their position is strong right out the gate. More text messages. Wow, that encrypted messaging system, yeah, I don't know how good that was. And now they get into some more in-depth accusations. So they accuse Al-Sahi of texting with some other UAE folk and then bringing information back to Barrick, which was specifically designed to influence the United States foreign policy in the first 100 days of the new presidency. So yet again, we have another large alleged step towards participating in some actions that are extremely serious. Because again, you have this allegation that a foreign government is dictating the policy being promoted by the President of the United States. Okay, so they discuss even more, as you guessed it, text messages. They then go on to allege assistance to the UAE in the new presidential election. Okay. So they allege that in or about and between January 2017 and October 2017, Barrick, Grimes, and Al-Sahi aided the UAE in its dealings with the executive branch of the US. So again, they are alleging that Barrick, Grimes, and Al-Sahi took actual information, dictates, wants, desires, whatever you want to call it, right, from the UAE and directly delivered it to the presidency in the US. And mind you, that is dangerous. That allegation, if true, is dangerous for a number of reasons. But the main reason being the security of the US. Because if that allegation is true, you have a government in the US that is not looking out for the general welfare and safety of the US constituency, right? But that is more so acting as a conduit for some foreign government. If true, that allegation is extremely dangerous. They get into some more messages and conversations that were exchanged. They then get into some phone calls between the three men. And more of the same, right? And now they get into a new allegation. Assistance to the United Arab Emirates, so the UAE, with appointments in the new presidential administration. Okay, let's get into this. So they allege that in March of 2017, Barrick, Al-Sahi, and Grimes acted on behalf of the UAE by advocating for the appointment of individuals favored by the UAE in the new US government. Whoa. Let's take a moment. So the government is not just alleging that these men were delivering messages, delivering preferences and policy, right? Which, let me be real, that's terrible enough. They are now alleging that these men were assisting the UAE in having an influence over who was hired and appointed for US government positions. So what that ultimately means, if true, is that the UAE was putting in place people in the US government who would be kind to whatever their needs and wants were, not the needs and wants of the US constituency. Wowza. Okay, very serious accusations. And they get into more text messages between all of these men, more substantiation and corroboration, more text messages. They then discuss some UAE officials making a visit to the White House. That is a further part of the allegation. Oh, wait, we missed the heading. What is that? They then discuss the Qatari blockade and continuing efforts to assist the UAE, which is just more of the same, more efforts that they are alleging were made to assist the UAE. More communication, more methods. And now they discuss the defendants' failure to comply with the notification requirement. So again, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to be an agent for a foreign government in the United States, listen, que sera, sera, right? But it is not something you can do covertly, or it is then illegal. If you are an ambassador, you are an agent of some sort, you have to notify and disclose that status to the government. So again, they're restating that Al-Sahi, Barrick, and Grimes did not make themselves known. They go in to discuss that. And then they get into Barrick's obstruction of justice and his materially false statements. So they say that in February of 2019, allegedly Barrick received a visit from the FBI. The FBI showed up with several subpoenas that included several individuals that were employed by a company that Barrick was involved with. Okay. And it was in connection with this entire investigation, which also included, as we know, Al-Sahi and Grimes. Okay. So following the subpoenas, Barrick allegedly volunteered to speak with the FBI. So picture the timeline. FBI shows up with subpoenas and all of the things and all of the really scary government powers. And Barrick then says, oh, no problem. I will, I volunteer to speak with you, allegedly. Now, on June 20th, 2019, FBI special agents interviewed Barrick in the presence of counsel. That is important to note, right? That is important to note because Barrick did not show up to speak to the FBI, all by his lonesome. He didn't just stroll in and say, yes, let's have a very casual combo. He came in with counsel, okay? So they allege that at the outset of the interview, the U.S. government's officials advised Barrick that lying to federal agents is a crime. Another important thing that they want to mention, because they want to let any judiciary looking at this indictment, they want to let them know, hey, Barrick was advised that if he proceeded to not be truthful in these interviews, in these conversations with the FBI, he was committing a crime. They then go on to allege that during the interview, Barrick knowingly made numerous materially, whenever you see the word material in the law, it means important. So if something is material, it is important. So they allege that Barrick knowingly made numerous important false statements relating to the activity of himself, Al-Sahi, and Grimes. And then they get into the counts, right? Which we at this point already know because we've gone through the factual part, but we'll just read them out. Count 1, acting as agents of a foreign government without prior notification to the Attorney General. Count 2, conspiracy to act as unregistered agents of a foreign government. They then discuss overt acts because, as you all know, if you are being charged with conspiracy, the government has to prove that you took some step towards somehow fulfilling this alleged conspiracy. And that is where your actions come in. So they have to show some sort of action that the people within the conspiracy took towards the furtherance of the conspiracy. And here they line that out. They have the emails, the text messages, and they have them lined by date. All righty, we're getting towards the end of this indictment, which, I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought we'd ever get to the end here? Let's see. More overt actions. Okay. More alleged overt actions. Count 3, obstruction of justice. Count 4, material false statements. Count 5, material false statements. Count 6, material false statements. And count 7, material false statements. So would you look at that? It looks like we actually made our way to the end of that indictment. So I'm going to hop in the chat, say hello to everyone. Would you believe that indictment? We've been reviewing that for, I would say, almost 40 minutes. Wow. All righty. Hi, Crime Spotter. Hi, Michelle Jordan. Hi, Amare Shager. Hi, KKC. Hi, Indigo. Hi, Stephanie Collins. All right, let me see and make sure I got everyone. So let me just hop in and kind of pull out some questions and or comments that I just want to highlight. So Stephanie Collins says, if these men were not working in the administration and were registered as lobbyists for the UAE, lots of this would likely not be considered criminal offenses. Absolutely. So the big deal here, everyone, is that these men were not lobbyists or ambassadors that were disclosed to and approved by the U.S. government. That is how these things are supposed to be done. And then Stephanie says that she believes they didn't break the phone. Someone gave them the messages. That's also possible. It is also possible that someone gave them the messages. Absolutely. All righty. Does anyone have any? Oh, I think I see a question. Oh, that was a question for Stephanie Collins. Does anyone have any questions about the indictment that we just took a look at? If not, we're going to have a quick little peruse of who Matthew Grimes is and who, you know what, we'll just stick with Matthew Grimes because I think at this point we understand who Thomas Barrack was, right? If you don't, Thomas Barrack was a long-term business partner of former President Trump. He was also very, very intricate in the campaign and then the eventual inauguration of former President Donald Trump. He was actually on the inauguration committee. So, yeah, someone that allegedly former President Trump was pretty close to. Okay, I don't see any questions. So let's hop into a quick little tidbit about who Matthew Grimes is. And then we're going to have a conversation about DACA. I know a lot of you have been asking me to cover DACA because there has been quite a bit of hubbub and development regarding what's going on in the state of Texas and DACA and a federal judge in Texas. So we're going to get there in a moment. So let me share my screen. And let's get into who is Matthew Grimes. All right. So Aspen Man, Trump inaugural committee chair. Okay. So remember, we know that Barrack was involved in the inaugural committee for former President Trump, right? So now we know that so was Grimes. So, it's possible that perhaps that is how Grimes and Barrack became acquainted with each other and how Grimes allegedly became an intermediary for Al-Sahi and Barrack. Okay, so we see this picture, we know. So they allege an Aspen man is among the 3 people who were charged Tuesday with acting as agents of a foreign government. We know that. We know that Matthew Grimes is 27 years old. We're aware of that. Okay. They go on to say Grimes worked with Barrack and Al-Malik to create, this is allegedly, of course, a wish list of policy achievements that the UAE wanted to occur within the first 100 days, right? So we saw that within the indictment. They then discussed that Grimes allegedly had some willingness from the outset to assist the UAE. And then they just kind of hash out the fact that Grimes is originally from Aspen, although he was arrested in California. So it doesn't appear that Grimes really has an illustrious or long-standing political career. From that article, which is from his hometown, it really reads that he may have been an average 27-year-old who maybe knew someone who knew someone and got a coveted position and then wanted to use that coveted position, perhaps allegedly, in my humble opinion, for a power play. So I see Stephanie Collins has a question. Her question is, do you think that there would be counts of material false statement if the defendants had remained silent during the interviews with the FBI or refused the interviews? Good point. So, in case you didn't know, if you do not say anything at all, you are not making a false statement. If you do not want to incriminate yourself, you do not have to. But if you choose to make a statement to any government official or law enforcement that you know is false, you are in trouble. So yes, Stephanie, it is better for you to not say anything at all than for you to have an interaction with law enforcement in which you know that you're saying something that isn't really above board, right? That isn't really true. And I will say this, my first day of criminal procedure class, this was, I think, my second year of law school. We walk into class and our professor is one of those lifelong prosecutors. She was an ADA for over 15 years, and then she became a federal prosecutor. So she is a lifelong prosecutor. And this woman stands up in front of the class and she says, "Hello, everyone. Welcome to criminal procedure class. If you learn nothing from me this semester, learn this. Nothing good ever comes from talking to the police." Right? And that was said by a lifelong prosecutor. So when in doubt, yeah, maybe, allegedly, it might be best for you to just not say anything at all. So we are now going to dive into DACA. Let me just give a quick hello to everyone. Hello, everybody. How's it going? And thank you for joining me today. Today we are really delving into some real legal topics. This is not, anything to do with pop culture per se. So those who are here, I know that you're really real and you really mean it, right? Alrighty, so let me queue up our DACA info. And while I do that, I have a little graphic for you all. Alrighty, so let us get into DACA. We'll start with an article which features a DACA recipient, and he is discussing what DACA has been for him in his life. And then we're going to actually look at a congressional report which explains what DACA is. All right, let us get started. All right, so this is from the Californian. DACA changed my life. Salinas recipient frustrated with Texas ruling barring new applicants. So here we have a picture of this gentleman, I believe. Let's delve into it. Every 2 years, Carlos Rene Castro, 23, pays nearly $1,000 to renew his deferred action for childhood arrivals. By the way, that's what DACA means. Deferred action for childhood arrivals status in order to live and work in the United States. DACA has changed my life, he said. Castro's parents brought him to the U.S. from Honduras when he was 5 years old. I came to this country at a young age, and I don't have the power to say no, he said. I feel like I am an American. DACA has allowed me to build my future in this country. I don't see myself having another future in Honduras. I'm forever grateful for DACA and what it's done for me and my family. So let's make sure we're taking note of that. DACA, as you can kind of see being prefaced here, is specifically for people who arrived to the United States as children. That is really important to note. Last week, U.S. District Judge Andrew Hanen in Houston ruled that DACA, an Obama administration program, created to allow undocumented immigrants who were brought into the U.S. as children, as we said, is illegal. The decision stops the acceptance of new DACA applications and leaves the door open for DACA to be terminated in the future. They then go on to discuss how many DACA recipients there are. The Department of Homeland Security may continue to accept new DACA applications and renew DACA applications as it has been ordered by the Batalla Vidal court cited above. But it is hereby enjoined from approving any new DACA applications and granting status. So in other words, they can take in new applications and they can renew old ones, but they cannot approve new applications. Okay. They then have a little soundbite from President Joe Biden in which he says that his opinion is that Hanen's ruling is deeply disappointing. They then discussed that after a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling in 2020, the program was reinstated to its former status. Castro himself gives us another soundbite about what DACA means to him. He says, "When I heard about the decision, I was not surprised, but still disappointed for the potentially new applicants that would benefit from DACA," Castro said. "It's very heartbreaking that these kids won't have the opportunity to further their lives and careers due to one person's power." And here we have a picture of Mr. Castro. Okay, so we have some level of understanding now, right, about how DACA affects the lives of those who receive it. And I think that's an interesting That's an interesting perspective to have, because usually when you view any law or any policy, you can view it from a very staunch kind of black and white space, or you can actually listen to the stories of the people who are affected by that legislation and get more of a feel for the life of the legislation. And that's the beautiful thing, in my opinion, about law and government and civics, right? You can view it as I said, black and white, but really it is a living thing. The law is a living, breathing organism, and it's living with you every day in your life. It's affecting everything that you do. So whenever I review laws that are kind of in the form of DACA, I like to look at some stories about people who are actually affected by that law. So Crime Spotter says, but don't the Democrats control the presidency, the Senate, and the Congress? Well, Crime Spotter, you have to remember that DACA, well, we're going to get into that actually, but as a preface, DACA was not passed as legislation, okay? DACA was an initiative of the Obama administration. It was not passed into law via Congress. So you have to remember that when you're talking about who's in control in the government now. And yes, the government now could initiate some new legislation and see if they could get it passed. True. But DACA is not legislation. DACA was an initiative by the Obama. DACA was an initiative by the Obama administration, not a law. And with that being said, let's get into what DACA is, shall we? I have queued up for you a FAQ by the Congressional Research Service about DACA and what it is. So here we go. Let me actually copy and paste this link into the chat because I want you all to have access to it if, for some reason you decide to take a look at it yourself. So that's the link. Okay, so here we go. Frequently asked questions. They give you a brief summary, but we don't want to dive into that. We want to dive into how it was established right here so that we can discuss why DACA is not law, because it is not legislation. It is an initiative. And that is the reason that there has been so much back and forth about it, because it was not passed through traditional congressional legislation means. Okay. And what I mean by that is, for those of you who, have some level of familiarity with the USA and how we pass something into a law, you know that it has to go through our Congress, right? Congress has to approve something, any type of legislation, right? And then it becomes a law. That didn't happen with DACA. DACA was just an initiative that the Obama administration drafted and said, while we are in power, this is how we're doing things. And then they began to do that, right? It wasn't a legislation that was passed. Anyway, let's get into that, shall we? Here we go. How was DACA established? The DACA initiative was announced by former DHS Secretary Janet Napolitano in a June 15th, 2012 DHS memorandum entitled Exercising Prosecutorial Discretion with Respect to Individuals Who Came to the United States as Children. So, here is what happened, everyone. In 2012, the DHS secretary under the Obama administration issued what is called an initiative, or you could call it a memorandum, to the people that she was supervising, so the people who she had dominion over. And she said, I want you to exercise some level of discretion whenever you're dealing with someone who came to this country as a child. So there was no law passed, everyone. You had the DHS secretary simply directing the people who it was in a managerial position over, to have a different level of discretion when they were dealing with someone who came into this country as a child. And if you're asking what is the policy behind that, the policy is that a child cannot control where they are being taken. So really what the government was saying at this time is, if you are brought to this country illegally and you were a child, it is not your fault. You did not pack up your bags, as a 7 or 8-year-old and say, hey, mom and dad, I'd like to enter the United States illegally. right? A child isn't doing that. So the policy is, because you were brought here illegally as a child and it was not of your own volition, we're viewing you in a lighter manner than someone who came here illegally as an adult. Alrighty, and you have these lovely detailed footnotes, which you can browse if you like. And then they have the eligibility for DACA, right? So everything we just said, under the age of 16 when you were brought to the United States, under the age of 31 back in 2012, continuous residence, continuous physical presence, also not convicted of a felony or any significant misdemeanor, and of some level of education, which it looks like they required at least high school. Okay. So I'm going to pause on this for a moment. Let me go ahead and put it on the first page just in case you all want to make sure you can find it on your own. And I'm going to quickly take some questions. So any questions on this? Do 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 do. So there are no questions on DACA and what it is, right? Because if not, we're going to move on to what this judge in Texas has to say about DACA. So if I don't see any questions, we're just going to keep it moving. I don't think I'm going to queue up the article. I probably will just go ahead and just kind of give you the cliff notes in the article. All right, let's see. Okay, I don't see any questions. So here we go. Here are the cliff notes of what this federal judge in Texas decided regarding DACA. So here's what he says. He ruled that deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, is illegal and ordered the Biden administration to stop granting new applications. Now, his order won't affect current DACA recipients, right? So if you already have received DACA and you have your 2-year work permit, because remember, as we learned from Mr. Castro, you have to renew every 2 years. So if you already have DACA and you have your 2-year renewable work permit, your permit is not going to be, revoked. It's just that new applications are affected, which we already heard, right? Hannon then goes on to say, these rulings do not resolve the issue of the thousands of DACA recipients and others who have relied upon this program for almost a decade. So he's saying that he's not trying to, in any way, even attempt to resolve some of the issues that have to do with what's going to happen to the people who are relying on this, right? He's saying, listen, although I am ruling that this is illegal, I am admitting that really it's not going to resolve the hundreds of thousands of people who are relying on it and what actually happens to them. Okay. So Hannon also said that the Obama administration did not use the right legal procedure to create the program, making it illegal. I actually want to copy and paste this into the chat because now we're going to have a conversation about that. Okay. So this is what the judge specifically said. He said the Obama administration did not use the right legal procedure to create the program. Remember what I said about how this type of policy usually becomes a law. Remember, this type of policy usually becomes a law by what? By way of passing through Congress the traditional way for legislation. But that did not happen in this instance. In this instance, you had someone within a secretarial executive branch position, so the DHS secretary, simply just issuing an initiative, which was then acted on. You did not have an immigration policy that was passed by way of law. And so the legal question that has been causing so much back and forth is whether or not the Obama administration had the power to do what they did. So the question is, did they have the power to create their own immigration policy without first having that policy become law? So here we go. Did they have the power? I was going to put it in the chat, but I hate when you all have to hear the clackety clack. So one more time. Did the Obama administration have the power to initiate their own immigration policy that was not approved by Congress and had not been enacted into law? That is the legal question that has been causing so much kerfuffle, so much back and forth. And that is the question that this judge says should be answered in the negative. And that is why he has ordered that this is in fact illegal. So as many of you know, the judiciary does not have an army. The judiciary does not have a police force, right? So although judges issue statements on the law, interpretations of the law, it is really up to the government to take those interpretations and orders seriously. So it is kind of sight unseen right now as to how the Biden administration is going to proceed with this and if they are actually going to follow this judge's direction. And what we do know for sure is this will more than likely lead to further litigation. More than likely we're going to have an appeal. The Supreme Court has already spoken on DACA. However, I assure you, whoever the parties are in this case, they're probably going to seek to try to have the Supreme Court review their case as well. And maybe they will, or maybe the Supreme Court will say, we've been there, done that, and we have nothing further to say. So you never know. Well, we are now at 6:13. Crime Spotter wants to know, oh, hi, Alonzo Hall. Crime Spotter wants to know, is there an age limit to DACA? Yes. So remember in our FAQ, I'm going to read it for you guys again. Let me scroll on down because they discuss ages. Okay. So remember from our little congressional research FAQ, the eligibility criteria for DACA is under the age of 16 at the time that you enter the U.S., and under the age of 31 on or around June 15th, 2012. Okay? All righty, everyone. So it has been a pleasure. Crime Spotter is in the chat trying to start a conflict. Crime Spotter is asking, so Obama was playing politics. Well, technically, former President Obama is not the person who issued the initiative, right? Technically, it was DHS Secretary Janet, I'm going to butcher her last name. You know what? Let me read it so I do not butcher it, because I'm telling you, I don't like butchering names. Janet Napolitano. Okay, so technically, it was not former President Obama himself, but it was someone from his administration. Alrighty, so I'm going to head on out. It has been wonderful spending my Sunday afternoon with you all. If you are here on the replay, what say you? What do you think about what is going on with this indictment and Barrick and Grimes and Al-Sahi? Do you really think that there were people who were close to former President Trump who were using former President Trump, in essence, to further the goals of other countries? And what do you think about DACA? What do you think is going to happen from here on out to these hundreds of thousands of people who are relying on DACA? And do you think that maybe they're being done wrong? Or do you think that their status was never legal to begin with and now we just have to resolve it? I don't know. What's your opinion on that? Alrighty, everyone. So, hello. Let me see your transcript. Good evening to you as well. I will catch you all next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And per usual, life lessons through a legal lens. We have learned today that if something is not passed into law via Congress, it can later on be ran over and toppled over by the next administration. All right. See you guys soon.